Oh, and have you run into the phenomenon where the estimated cloud cost is greatly different from the real cloud costs? And I think it's happening quite a bit out there. And why is this happening? What do you think of the difference? What is the problem there?
So anecdotally, we do hear a lot about this concept of bill shock, where the CIO will open their cloud invoice at the end of the month, and they'll discover there is a line item on their bill which is far more than they had budgeted for, and obviously it's a legal liability. They owe it to the cloud provider, and it's difficult to get out of that. I think with the cloud comes great power, but obviously with that great power you need great responsibility. As Rob was saying, for me the benefit of the cloud is the concept of scalability, is that you can increase your cloud application when you have demand, and you can meet all that revenue when it's being presented to you. But a lot of it is also scaling back your cloud when you don't need that capability there, so you can reduce costs. And I think a lot of the times CIOs aren't really keeping track of how they're spending, how they're using the cloud, what resources they're using. And keeping a firm handle on that can mean that the cost won't spiral out of control. I think a lot of it is just down to the maturity of using the cloud. I'm not sure organizations are really set up to use the cloud in an efficient and cost-effective manner yet, but slowly and surely things are changing.
Well, on that same issue, isn't part of the problem is that the cloud isn't necessarily cheaper. It's being sold sometimes as cheaper, but it's a better tool, it's a more flexible tool, but it's not necessarily a cheaper tool. Is that your experience, Owen, or what?
Yes, I would agree, and I think really the concept of, it shouldn't really be regarded as a concept of cost, it should be the concept of value.
Right.
So if you have an application that is very steady, that never needs to scale, and that has 100% utilization on the server, then it might be possible that it would be cheaper to run on a private cloud. But if the application needs to burst, if it needs to gather new resources with changing demands, on a private cloud it's much harder to do that. On the public cloud, you can just take that capacity when you need it. And I think that capacity is worth the expenditure because you should derive more revenue as a result of it. So for me, I think end users and enterprises should look at value rather than just cost savings.
Right. Deirdre, the difference between estimated cost and actual cost, and in particular, what about those bills that cloud providers can send out? I've never seen one, but I've heard horror stories about them. They look sort of like the phone bill with all these confusing line items. What's going on there?
You need a PhD like Owen to figure out and make sense of it. And
let's call Owen. Whenever we get a bill from Amazon, let's just all call Owen.
Oh, don't worry, they do.
They do, they do, okay.
Yeah, it's usually the bill comes after the fact, with no sort of visibility into what's coming next month and the next quarter. So it's already consumed. So it's kind of like relevant to that shadow IT comment I had earlier. So people are frenzied. They're like, okay, let's fire up some Amazon services. We're a department, scan it on our credit card. Before you know it, every department in the business is doing the same. And the CIO gets the bill and the shock happens and cloud sprawl. I totally agree with what Rob was saying is part of the problem is cloud has become this forcing function for IT to be much more on top of the finances and the cost aspects of adopting this new technology. And if they don't have an idea of what IT is costing them today, then they really aren't armed and dangerous to understand what's IT, whether it's externally hosted or running in Amazon or Azure, what's that costing us now and what will it cost us down the road? So just
I'm not sure I understood that. Are you saying the cloud actually helps a business understand costs? Or maybe I'm not hearing you right.
Yeah, it forces IT to look at, because it's pay-as-you-go and it's on a consumption basis, it forces IT for this to have this major paradigm shift to move away from this yearly annual budget allocation-based spend or budgeting across all functions of the business, and it actually forces them to think about it in a totally different way, which is because different parts of the business need to consume different ICT services based on what their projects are. So really, it's having a different set of tools or technologies to run IT like a business. So what is sales and what is marketing and what is finance costing me now and down the road? And if they decide it's cheaper to run it in a public or private cloud, first of all, they have to know what is it costing me today, but then what will it cost me if I choose HP OpenStack or if I choose Azure, or take your pick. Mm-hmm. So they have to really have those tools at their fingertips in order to know what's best financially and what's the economic advantage of moving to the cloud.
Rob, your sense of the difference between estimated costs and actual costs, and so that sticker shock with those confusing bills, what's going on there?
Yeah, well, so we actually see people struggle to get to the estimated costs. Obviously, getting to the actual cost is pretty easy, but we're starting to see a lot of actually cloud providers themselves running into challenges with the enterprise market. Of course, everybody's trying to run to the enterprise today to unlock the next wave of growth in cloud spend. But the enterprise is saying, well, we budget things and we allocate things and we contract things, so what is this going to cost? And that process of actually coming up with an estimated cost is actually problematic for the cloud providers themselves. And this is an area where we've been trying to help them, is to come up with an estimated cost that resembles the actual. And that's a non-trivial exercise when you think about, just take Amazon, right? 40, 50, 60, 70 line items on their price sheet, right? And you need to know how many disk rewrites, how much bandwidth, but of the bandwidth, how much was local and how much was internet, how much of that is going to shift over. So I think if organizations were better able to plan these things ahead of time, they would have less sticker shock. The shadow IT problem or the shadow IT movement is what caused the movement to the cloud in the first place, and there was no planning. It just did. Mm-hmm. Right.
People with credit card, like divisions, like the division credit card, let's get this going. Yeah.
Well, that's it, exactly. I mean, your financial audit goes back and finds you found out $2-3 million in book expenses last year.
Okay. Minor costs like that.
But there's lots of organizations now that are over $1 million a month with public clouds. And it's a huge unaudited expense. Nevertheless, I think where the struggle is the lack of planning. If the CIO and the CTO could understand ahead of time, this is what it costs now, this is what it's going to cost, then they can start to track, the estimated to actual and the variance on that. But in many cases, historically, that step has been skipped, and as a result, everybody expects it to be cheaper, and it's not necessarily.